Welcome back to the Guild Wars Graveyard, the show in which we run through a bunch of the features and ideas that were going to come into the game and never did in the end, including old armor, old weapons. Today we'll be looking at old skills that just never ended up getting implemented, as well as, shortly afterwards in the next part, the mastery system, which I'm super excited about, because what we got for the mastery system is just a shadow of what the devs were clearly originally planning. In fact, I think they might have had a tree-like structure as an idea at one point. There's all kinds of fun stuff that we'll be able to look at just today. Obviously, there are already a lot of masteries in the game, but it's specifically the Heart of Thorns era, where we got just these first four: Gliding, Itzel, Exalted, and New Hawk, which actually once upon a time were going to be very, very expanded. But first, let's talk about skills. So here I'm a warrior. Obviously, I've got 3 sword skills, the 2 shield skills. Skills do go through revamps over the year. They may change their functionality. That may affect the amount of conditions or damage or whatever that they do. But what you might not know is that very early, before the game came out and the devs were really messing with the system, they talked about a lot of stuff that ended up completely getting cut. Flip over skills, suggestions that there'd be more than just 3 sword abilities, for example, and so much more. So let's run through everything I can find over on the wiki. And again, many thanks to the people on the wiki for being able to set this up, really. So I'll try to go class by class. Let's start off here with the Ranger. There was an ability called Venom Sting coming to the game. The description was poison your foe with a stab. Was never implemented. You see, this was the original Dagger 5. Dagger 5 these days is like a little dash to the side and you stab, apply some condi. Well, here we were looking at a similar thing maybe, but without the evade in front. The UI art I actually do find really interesting. Now down here you'll see as well, one of the original traits back with their old like materia style trait system where traits specifically affected individual skills. If you picked up Viper's quickness, then you would actually be lowering the recharge of this. We also got this table here. This table is referring to another old feature that I mentioned in a previous part of the graveyard, whereby at level 7, you could first buy Venom's Sting. It wouldn't randomly unlock. You'd actually go to a vendor who would train you about it. It would be a bit of a gold sink. And I know a lot of you guys cringe at the idea of gold sinks, but I actually think they're very healthy for the MMO. And then way later, when you hit combat level 17, you could buy tier 2. And this would go all the way up to 9 tiers. By the time the game came out, they actually got rid of this tier system. ArenaNet really tried to refine away stuff they thought was superfluous. We see other MMOs do stuff like this. Personally, I actually think this would have been good for the game, in particular if new mechanics kept building into the skills as you tiered them up. Because right now, every individual skill in Guild Wars 2 can provide 2, 3, 4, even 5 effects at once in terms of doing damage, plus a condi, plus an evade, plus a flip over or whatever. And if they slowly were introduced to you as you bought new tiers, and you're obviously going to read about what you're getting every time you're being asked to spend money, that would have been a really good system. It's not in there, but for these old unimplemented ones, you can still see the table and what the community gathered back in the day. People not really getting higher than level 17, as you can tell. Only the level 1 to 15 map was open. Next, we have an old trap. This never came into the game. This is the Dust Trap. Set a trap to blind foes. It does exist in Guild Wars 1, as they say. So what I find interesting about this one is that this actually would have bumped the ranges up to more than the standard amount of a single type of skill you'd expect a profession to possess. I guess the reason the Dust Trap went away is because it actually overlapped a lot with thief stuff. What you might not know is that the Ranger was among the first 4 professions that the devs introduced and implemented. The Thief came later, and when they added the Thief, they kind of added all this smoke stuff in, smoke screens and black powders and so on. And at that point, I guess the Dust Trap never felt different enough to those thief abilities, and it went the way of the Dodo. That's just my guess. The devs have never really commented on this. Next, we have the Elementalists going over to Lava Arrows. Again, a Guild Wars 1 ability. I actually can see this fit very well into Guild Wars 2 as some kind of auto attack. It's described as a cone-shaped volley of projectiles, which is funny because if you think about the Dagger main hand fire attunement auto attack, it's basically that, a small cone of projectiles, but those travel across the floor, and the ability is called Dragon's Claw, I think. Instead here, we've got the idea that maybe they'd have longer range. I can really imagine them sort of arcing through the air with, you know, these slight curves to them. Could have been pretty good. Maybe something like the Water Scepter auto attack, but instead as lava arrows. In any case, the devs never added it. Specifically the idea that arrows, maybe they were even considering having another Conjure bow. Right now, Elementalists get the Conjure ice bow, or frostbow as it's called, and that's kind of both a longbow and a shortbow at once. Well, what if the lava arrows would have been on a lava-themed longbow, and we would have an icy-themed shortbow, but never ended up in the game. Next, we have a really fun one, because it deals with energy, which is no longer a mechanic whatsoever. Energy Blast. Now, to look at the icon here, you will recognize that as Arcane Blast in the game now. It's a whole selection of skills called the Arcane skills, Arcane Shield, and so on. Well, once upon a time, they were not called Arcane skills. They were called Energy skills, and the reason for this was because they all operated around the energy mechanic. This is in reference to the fact that Guild Wars 1 Elementalists had a whole line called Energy Storage, and also interacted with that in more interesting ways than the other professions. Like, they had tons more energy than anyone else. When the devs got rid of energy and energy potions as concepts, well, they had to revamp some of the Elementalists, and all that stuff became arcane. But you can still check out some of their original ideas. So Energy Blast was hold and release to shoot an arcane blast. The longer held, the more energy you'll expend for damage. There is a whole concept of skill that the devs don't play with much anymore, and that is hold for a stronger effect. So you do still see this in game in like World vs. World firing a trebuchet. The longer you hold it down, the further the projectile goes. Well, at launch they had a lot more of that in the combat system. This would be one such example. You're charging it, and draining energy as you go until you finally release for a big bomb of damage, and you're kind of deciding. I actually think that this is a really interesting interaction. Most of it got removed. The Elementalists had another one as well. Their heal skill, Ether Renewal, is like a 3-second long channel skill nowadays, but originally it was kind of an ability that felt more like hold the button down, and as long as you're healing, you're holding it, you're regenerating. A lot of that stuff went away. I wonder whether it was a latency network thing, not sure. But anyway, so you're kind of seeing two interactions here, the one with energy and the one with the hold down, both gone. And this is what remains. Interestingly enough, if you play some human personal story steps, you can still see NPCs using abilities like these. The old Energy Shield, which became Arcane Shield, is still in game. You can see the NPCs use it. You can mouse over the active effect, and it will say something similar. It will say, defend yourself from damage, but also lose energy whenever you are struck. If you run out of energy, the shield goes away. It's a similar thing, and that's how all these skills originally worked. Next, we have the Glyph of Concentration. Glyphs are a category of Ellie skill that has a different effect based on the attunement that you're in. And Ellies actually already have a ton of glyphs. They have 7 of them, right? They've got the heal, they've got the elite, and then they have 4 utilities. Okay, so they've got 6 of them. Sorry, bad maths. They've got 6 glyphs. The full roster, well, they were even more before release. Here, you cannot be knocked down, stunned, chilled, or launched. You'll notice that this does not have a different effect based on element. So I guess what happened was ArenaNet liked that element shifting idea, and at that point, many of these glyphs went away. They had such a bloated category as well. The thing is, glyphs were a type of skill in Guild Wars 1, and so they had all these ideas. There was an old trait as well called Scribe, which would reduce the recharge of this glyph. Maybe old traits is an interesting thing to do a video on at one point. So there you go, Glyph of Concentration. There's also the Glyph of Elemental Storage. Glyphs store one of your skills from your current attunement to use while under the effects of another attunement. This one is really fascinating. An epic cooldown of 105 seconds. You have to remember that back at Vanilla, they did have long cooldowns. They were more strategic about the combat. Things were way less spammy. And the idea of being able to just hold one skill is really amazing. So what? I hit the glyph, and then I cast Phoenix, and then I swap to Water Attunement, and the glyph becomes Phoenix, maybe? Something like that. I can see this skill being sort of a stepping stone between the original idea of glyphs and then what they became, having different attunement effects. I still really like this idea, and it's very similar to the old version of Mimic for the Mesmer, where they could get hit with a projectile and then the skill would turn into that projectile, and you could fire it back, would break fractals. Fun one for me here. On the focus, Elementalists do get Obsidian Flesh. That's been in the game the whole time. It's an invuln. Actually went through a bit of a revamp just this year. Well, back before the game came out, it would flip from Obsidian Flesh into Obsidian Flame. which the Guild Wars 1 players will know was actually a big Earth nuke ability. And I guess ArenaNet decided that it didn't thematically fit with the defensive nature of the Earth attunement focus skills. They ended up getting rid of it, but there was going to be a flip over. Obsidian Flame was going to make it. You might see Obsidian Flame come back into the game one day, particularly with the Canthan expansion and the guild, the Obsidian Flame. I think it would be cool to see that. You know, maybe the next elite specialization for Ellie is called the Obsidian or something, and you would see it, but this was going to be a vanilla skill. Not implemented. Over to Guardian now. We got a really fun one. This is Retribution. Very simple. Grant yourself retaliation. So I actually love skills like this, and vanilla was full of them. One skill, one effect. The problem is, because of what I genuinely do consider to be shoddy balance, over the years, pretty much everything in Guild Wars has been in an arms race of power creep, so it's not enough for a single skill to give a single effect like this anymore. There's no way that they can justify it. Instead, you'll find it's giving you retail and another boon, and it'll be on a strike, or it's on a symbol as well at the same time, and so on. So, way back when, you could have dedicated a whole utility skill to 5 seconds of retaliation, maybe boostable in length from some other ways with a 15-second cooldown. Maybe they just felt that it wasn't very fun to just sort of press, you know, every time it came back and bring the retaliation back. In a world where retaliation is scarce enough that this is justified, the boon itself could be buffed and a little bit more interesting, but retail in general is just a messy one, you know, how retail feels in world versus world versus in 5 versus 5 versus in PvE is all over the shop. I need a lot of work for it. Next, back to Ranger. Oh, my mistake. Sorry, we already did Ranger, didn't we? I guess I ordered this slightly out. The Staggering Throw. So this is Axe 2. Axe 2 these days splits a bunch of axes out in front of you, does a bit of damage, bit of condi. Well, here, you'd actually have a knockback on the skill 2. Now, this is weird because the way that the weapon skills are designed is that they are getting increasingly long cooldowns and increasingly more potent effects as you go through the skill bar. Well, Staggering Throw would have been a very strong effect on quite a long cooldown in a weird place. I guess that might have gone away, and those Ranger players in the early days actually documented their tears again. Good stuff. Over to Warrior. The Impaling Throw. This was going to be a great sword ability where you throw it at someone and immob them. There is a great sword ability in the game, as we know, the skill 4. I think it's called Blade Trail. That you sort of boomerang out and it cripples. I guess the devs thought the immob was too strong. Don't forget as well the Warrior capacity to turn a cripple into an immob, essentially recreating this skill. So this one was lost, but I actually think what they went with in the end was perfectly fine. Hilt Bash as well for the sword. This is what I opened the video talking about. Sword obviously just gets you 3 skills. But here, we basically have what became a Ranger skill. Rangers get this Hilt Bash on their greatsword. It's just like a recolored version of it. Well, originally, this was going to be here. It was going to be called Pommel Bash, Daze Your Foe. I think you can actually still find this on some weird environmental objects around in the game. But what would that have been on? Would that have been as a part of the auto attack chain? Would that have been a part of the leap? The final thrust? I guess there just wasn't space for it in the end. And my favorite warrior skill, probably my favorite skill we're going to go over in this whole video, to be honest. I will avenge you. So, this was a huge, iconic ability for Guild Wars 1's particularly PvP scene. Back then, this ability would give you massive health regeneration and benefits as long as you were near a dead ally. So, you could play a group where you had a ton of pets, all the pets die, and now everybody's super strong because that we're avenging the pets. What a great idea, and I think the devs were fond of that meta too, so they were gonna add our new shout to the game, this warrior shout, I will avenge you for Guild Wars 2, nodding back. And here's what it did. Gain might, regen, and swiftness. If you kill a foe, all your allies rally. Now, don't forget, the downstate system was kind of a radical thing. Only Borderlands 1 had really been playing with this before Guild Wars 2 came out. And they liked what Gearbox did. They incorporated it into their new game. They played with it in the skill system a bit. I mean, this is a really interesting effect. I mean, particularly that if you kill a foe, your allies rally. The thing is, the way the game's gone in the end is it's very easy to tag the target from downstate anyway and cause the rally. So if the rally mechanics were a little bit different, and I do think for what it's worth, a refinement to the rally mechanics is totally justified and could do well even to this day, a skill like this might really work. But there you have it. The resurrection radius was actually a 1200 radius around you, which is massive, by the way. I know we're used to 1200 range in terms of like single target attacks in one direction, but a 1200 radius is enormous. And it would last for 10 seconds as well. Really, really interesting. Finally, you can actually find the leader of the Renegades in the personal story apparently does use this skill. Oh, I did my whole personal story LP and I never mentioned this. This is the coolest thing. Someone should totally get footage of Ajax rallying a ton of his friends. But the enemies don't go in downstate in PvE, so you couldn't see that. Anyway, it's nice to see. Next, we have Duplicate, which is actually, I think, very close to a Mesmer skill that ended up in the game. So, first of all, you'll see the icon actually looks like mirror images, a utility skill we have nowadays. But this was actually going to be on the staff, and so it says summon an illusion that attacks with Chaos Strike. And you might think, well, that's really rubbish. But what I actually think's happened here is they haven't fully written out the full explanation of what the skill is, because it is a leap finisher. So if you think about it, this might just be an early version of Phase Retreat, which is a current staff skill for the Mesmer. You jump backwards a bit, you trigger a leap finisher, and you leave an illusion in your place, a clone. So actually, I don't think this is too different. They do say on the wiki here, though, that the teleport was a random position instead of away, which is funny. Guild Wars 1 had a very similar situation with some of its assassin skills, in that they once upon a time teleported you into a random place, nobody liked the skills, and then the devs had them move you directly away. A change that actually crashed some PvP maps. Moving on, we have a really cool thing, because this is a Mesmer Shatter. Everyone knows the Mesmer Shatters, hopefully. You've got Mind Rack, Cry Frustration, Diversion, Distortion, and then if you're a Chrono, you get Continuum Split. But they are iconic. Well, Chrono changes them all. Well, how about this? There was going to be a Shatter called Reflection. Shatter, destroy your illusions, and apply a barrier around the caster which reflects projectiles. So this actually sounds a lot like what the Elementalists ended up being able to apply in abundance, the Magnetic Aura. It sounds like maybe that aura was first on this. We saw at launch, ArenaNet were really not good at figuring out exactly how to use projectile reflects, because they are so defensive in nature and so offensive in nature. They completely broke dungeons in a lot of ways. This is a very refined idea, where I can imagine a version of Guild Wars 2 where there's very little, almost no reflection at all in the game, but the Mesmer class gets it. That would make sense to me, and it's tied to a long cooldown Shatter. That's very cool. Moving over to Necro. Necro is interesting. There were some mechanics on Necro that are not being documented by the wiki. Like, for example, it used to be that you never had a downstate as a Necro in the traditional sense. Instead, when you would go downstate, that is when you would enter Death Shroud. And in Death Shroud, you could run around, but when Death Shroud ended, you would always teleport back to where you had initially entered it. A bit like the Mesmer got with Continuum Split in the end. So the idea was Necros were this tanky, attritive thing that could fight from beyond death to a stronger capacity than these other classes in Downstate. They had a lot of really wicked and cool ideas for the Necro. Nothing really ended up making it. Once upon a time, the Shadow Fiend minion that Necros can summon as just a regular minion right now, that was only available in the original idea for Death Shroud. So Death Shroud gave you a minion in there, and that's why that minion looks a lot like it's in Death Shroud. That's why it's like the ghostly black looking one. So there are a lot of cool things. Wiki only has a couple of skills listed out that I can find, but they are interesting, and they come from Lich Form. So Lich Form's gone through many changes over the years. First of all, you have Horror. Make all foes just flee in fear. We have the Withering Aura, which was a Guild Wars 1 skill. You would cast on your minions and spam weakness around. Summon an aura that cripples, poisons, and weakens foes all at once. And it's also important to know, I couldn't find a wiki page on it, that Jagged Horrors originally came from the Lich form. You're a Lich, so I've always liked the idea that Lich form was all about minion summoning, and the Jagged Horrors from it were really dangerous minions. That would still work for the game to this day, that Lich form is a way to access like multiple flesh golems at once or whatever, just strong minions. But Jagged Horrors ended up really kind of lame, as we've seen in the game going forwards, though they've had their refinements and their tweaks. Finally, the last skill for the Graveyard is an engineer utility skill called Smelling Salts. Engineer was one of the last ones they implemented, a bit like Mesmer, so you don't see so much work in progress-y stuff going on. Smelling Salts here was on a 45-second cooldown. Throw Smelling Salts to resurrect allies and remove conditions. Well, we do see that actually Elixir R ended up providing this effect. I'm guessing what happened here is the studio were implementing engineer skills, but they didn't quite have the idea of the core mechanic tied down, where engineers basically get double skills because of their tool belt. And so when the day came that they realized the tool belt is what they wanted to do, they condensed some stuff together, and what was originally going to be Smelling Salts just got thrown onto Elixir R. Which is a shame, because I think this is a better name for it, right? An elixir that you throw down to res people? Smelling salts. It's a much better name. Or even as like a trait that modifies an existing elixir. And what's especially funny is in a pre-release interview, the devs were talking about you can revive yourself if you throw it on the ground before you go down, which is totally true for Elixir R. So all the mechanics here are there. We just lost out on a good name. So there you have it. That's the skill edition of the Guild Wars 2 Graveyard. Thanks very much for watching, guys, and I will see you very soon for the Masteries, which are also just as interesting, if not more so, actually. I'll be producing that in just a second. You should see the video very soon, too. I do want to remind you guys we have a community Discord that if you want to chat about this kind of stuff or any of the kind of videos I make, please feel free to go down there and click it. While I was away, it kind of shrunk a little bit. I'm trying to boost the numbers up and remember to actually mention something at the end of each video. So there you have it, guys. Thanks very much. See you soon.